So thank you all for taking time tonight to learn about water harvesting for abundant gardens with Michael Wedgley from Soilogical and Heath too. And so this evening's class is funded by the Solano County Water Agency. So want to also extend a special welcome to our sustainable gardening interns. This is part of their internship. So my name is Nicole Newell, and I'll be moderating tonight's class, and I'm one of the program managers for Sustainable Solano. So we're located in Solano County, which is part of the San Francisco Bay Area, and our mission is to nurture initiatives for the good of the whole. So you can learn more about our programs by checking out our website and through our email newsletter. So the Sustainable Backyard program that I manage aims to introduce the concept and practice of permaculture to Solano County, and it's funded by the Solano County Water. I'd like to introduce you all to Michael and Heath. They are from Soilogical, and they do permaculture design and specialize in applying microbiology. So happy to have them both here, and thank you for being here. And the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Just first want to welcome everybody to our presentation. Creating a drought-resilient oasis, and it's water harvesting for abundant gardens. My name is Michael Wedgley, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm a permaculture designer. And just going to assume not everybody knows what permaculture is, but basically permaculture is a method of design that utilizes principles that we find in nature to create abundance with minimal inputs and maintenance. I'm also a certified water harvesting designer, and this really applies to the presentation that we'll be doing today, but it's a certification that I received from the Watershed Management Group in Tucson, Arizona. I am also a certified soil food web lab technician, and my work in soil is to help people establish a healthy microbiome in their soils so that they can grow with nature and completely eliminate the use of pesticides and fertilizers of all kinds while creating the healthiest plants available on the planet. And let's see, I don't think we have enough time to go too much into how I became available or how I became interested in this work. So I'm actually just going to move on to the next slide here. Also, I started an organization called Soilogical Biosolutions and Designs. Heath works with me, and we do all sorts of things from edible landscapes and food forests to rainwater harvesting. We also do applications of soil biology. We do biological assessments as well of soil microbes. And we really hope to be a resource for everybody that's here. Whether it's answering questions, by phone or by email, coming to your property, giving you guys some kind of guidance, do a design or something, possibly install a garden. We just want to be able to be a resource for everybody in our community. So with that being said, I also want to introduce Heath Griffith.
Hey y'all, my name is Heath, and I'm really stoked to be here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I just started working with Michael and Soilogical earlier this year after completing my first permaculture design course with Vital Cycles, which was through Sustainable Solano. It's an amazing opportunity. And I'm really using this moment to pivot my experience from food production and some science education into permaculture. And I love it. I'm really enjoying this work. So I am excited to be here. I'll pass it back to Michael.
Awesome. Perfect. So just want to go over real quick an outline for everybody what we'll be covering today. So that way everybody's mentally prepared for the topics that we're going to be discussing. We're going to start with the why, and we're going to do a brief overview of the state of our freshwater supply on a micro and a macro level. We'll discuss the benefits of water harvesting as it applies to a drought-resilient garden, the techniques that are used, and also how to integrate those techniques into your own garden designs. We'll discuss how to choose the right types of plants for your drought resilient garden as it applies to whatever water harvesting techniques that you're choosing to use. And then we'll briefly discuss irrigation methods for your garden. We'll see a few examples of drought resilient gardens, and then also discuss some of the maintenance involved. And lastly, we will discuss possible rebates that can help make the transition to a drought resilient garden more economical for everybody. The slide isn't moving. Okay. All right, so Heath, do you want to talk about the current state then of water?
I would love to. When I find my notes. Okay. So we just want to jump right in and give a quick overview with what's going on with water. It's a watery planet, but somehow there's never enough of it. Michael's going to spend, well, we'll both spend most of our time talking about actual techniques, but we wanted to just give you a sense of where we are. As a whole, I feel like we're becoming more aware of the shifts that are taking place in our freshwater supply, but here's some actual numbers. Worldwide, over 2 billion people lack access to safe drinking water. By 2025, half of the world's population is expected to live in water-stressed areas. And the world's 37 largest aquifers are being depleted at an unsustainable rate. Over half of them are experiencing declines in water shortage. So it's just really something that we need to be taking into consideration in our daily lives, because it's, it's becoming dire. Once half of the world's population has difficulty accessing fresh water, it's going to change some things. So we really want to do what we can where we are to manage that as best as we can. In the United States, we have the Oglala Aquifer, which you can see, it'll be it's called the High Plains Aquifer on your screen, and it's all of the color on that map. The Oglala Aquifer spans across 8 states in the Midwest, and much of the country's corn and soy gets grown out there. And it's estimated to be depleted within 25 years. So if those previous stats of about 50% of the world's population being in water stress environments doesn't hit home, just think about if 30% of our country's crops couldn't be irrigated because this aquifer dried up. There's all of the food that's produced there, not to mention the people that live there. There's also watersheds that are part of, this aquifer. It'll affect the entire country's food supply. And 80% of the United States is experiencing abnormally dry conditions anyway. So, again, these are the state of things, and we'll get more into some specifics in a little bit. We're going to keep zooming in to California. At this point, I'm sure you are familiar with this kind of map. This is from 2021. So it's not a current map, but it is reflective of what we've been experiencing. California's water supply is highly variable, as most of us know. It's not only putting us at risk of water and food insecurity, but it's also leading to more intense and frequent wildfires. The atmospheric rivers that we're used to rely on to keep our state's water supply filled just aren't dependable anymore.
Can I step in real quick, Heath?
Yes, please.
This map, again, like he said, we're all kind of used to it. And it is much different now if you've seen it this year. And that is because of that, abnormal atmospheric river that we had. But yeah, that's not something that we can really rely on. And we're going to get more into why when we get into the hydrological cycle. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody, it'd be interesting actually, if you could in the comments, maybe you could even tell us, since we're talking more about California, there's also some of the implications of this is the wells are drying up, and I'm really curious to hear if anybody has a well that's drying up, or if there's any types of like anxiety around the current state of your well. I'd be really interested to see that. So, but I've definitely had clients who have experienced their wells dry up, and I know it's pretty devastating. So, ready to move on to the next.
All right, so finally, the micro level, our local level, the current state of water in Solano County. We're facing some threats from multiple angles here. As a county that's surrounded by bay and marshland, we not only face the threat of drought as the rest of the state and country is experiencing it, but are also facing threats from rising sea levels, which impacts our groundwater actually. Rising sea levels will increase the amount of salinity or the amount of salt in our freshwater supply. So that is also something that's gonna be impacting coastal communities, waterside communities around the world. So pivoting to solutions. All of this takes us to the water cycle, also known as the hydrologic cycle, and our solutions are going to be found in understanding how this cycle works. It seems straightforward. You can see the blue arrows that's showing where water is flowing, water vapor, water molecules flow through the land and ocean. But we're going to walk through all of its elements and how fragile this cycle actually can be. The main things you want to understand is that obviously you have precipitation that falls to the earth from the clouds in the atmosphere, or precipitation can be caught by trees from fog. That water makes its way to where it, makes its way back to the oceans, usually how we think about it. It's the journey from when the precipitation falls to when it gets back to the ocean that we need to understand more. In the natural cycle, that water that precipitates has a number of routes it can take. It can soak into the ground and become water in part of a tree or a plant. It may percolate through our soils and exit soils as a spring. It could sit in a lake where it hydrates the surrounding landscape and provide critical habitat. Eventually, it might make its way to a river and out to the ocean. That's the natural process and journey that water takes across the land. We also have what is known as evapotranspiration. I'm going to say that one more time and slower. Evapotranspiration. It's like evaporation and then combined with something called transpiration. Evaporation, as you know, is where water evaporates off of the surface of a lake or an ocean or the soil. Transpiration is essentially how plants breathe. We breathe air, plants breathe air. That process is called transpiration. And in the process of transpiration, plants actually give off oxygen and water vapor. So evapotranspiration in total it's the process that water evaporates either off surfaces of land or out through plants, and then it's held in our atmosphere after that process. What's amazing is that between 60 and 90% of the precipitation that falls on the land never goes back to the ocean. It never completes that journey through the streams. It returns to the air, or it returns to the atmosphere through evapotranspiration. So while the drought map this year shows us, that out of the drought, that though we're out of the drought thanks to this atmospheric river, the type of precipitation that rainwater brings, that kind of atmospheric river brings, is only 10 to 40% of what we can expect in any given year. So we need to focus on evapotranspiration. That's a way we can actually take action in our communities, and how our communities treat water can actually disturb this cycle a lot. So by clearing forests and paving over natural ecosystems, by taking rain that hits our properties and moving it immediately into storm drains or gutters, by trying to take all the water and get it back to the ocean as fast as possible, we're actually completely breaking the evapotranspiration cycle. Where this results in dried up wells and aquifers, it results in parched land, dying ecosystems, and it actually results in less and less water available to fall as precipitation. So we can actually take steps, even though the drought might feel like something that's out of our control, we can actually take steps in our communities to increase the amount of precipitation that falls by taking these steps that we're going to walk you through. So we can really address the state of our fresh water by trying to mend this water cycle. We can contribute to increasing levels of evapotranspiration by, instead of trying to move our water off our land as fast as possible, we want to slow it down and sink it into the soil, plant plants around them. And then we remember that the more water in our soils actually contributes to more moisture in the air, more water in the air. So that's the grand scheme. That's the goal. And then Michael's going to pivot from science to money, and we're going to talk a little bit about how this can also help your pocketbook.
Cool. Yeah. So we discussed in pretty great detail environmental impact that water can have. But I think for some, it's also important to discuss the economics of water. So here in Benicia, water is charged on a per unit basis, and that's 750 gallons. And it costs $5.54 per 750 gallons. And that number is going to go up to in 2025 to $6.69. So using the price of water and arbitrarily using the example of a 2,000 square foot home in Benicia, where the average yearly rainfall is 19 inches, we're able to harvest up to 21,000 gallons per year on a 2,000 square foot home. And which, if we use the cost of water, that then equates to $157 worth of water that we are able to harvest per year. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but 21,000 gallons is a lot. Let's see. And if we harvest it also in the right way, it can also easily support a low water garden in a 1,000-foot garden. And then also, if you're converting it from a lawn, well, then we can really rack up savings. The water needs to irrigate a 1,000 square foot lawn is 6,000 gallons per week, which costs $2,783 per year. And in addition, currently the Sonoma County Water Agency and many of the water companies in the state offer a rebate for switching from a lawn to a drought-resilient garden. And the water agency here in Solano County, they'll give you $1.50 per square foot, as Nicole mentioned earlier, up to $1,500. And so that cost will more than pay for a professional garden design. And then that money also can be saved. Then money can be saved within 1 to 2 years, and actually even pay for like a professional to install it. So not only is there, environmental reasons to create a drought resilient garden, but the financial incentives make it super low barrier to have a beautiful and modern garden that has far less maintenance than like your typical lawn would. I'm curious, actually, maybe I'll go back to that. If anybody has questions around that, because I know that's a lot of math pretty fast. But if anybody has questions, I could stop here and actually take a second to answer them. Let me look in the chat. Have you seen anything pop up? No, Nicole? Okay. If anybody has a question, just pop it in there and I can go back to that. So yeah, so now that we've covered like the reasons for drought resilient gardens and the importance of water harvesting, we're going to dive more into some of the techniques into water harvesting. Much of the knowledge, by the way, and practice with water harvesting that I use originated from this book, and also through his watershed management group that he started in Tucson, and his name is Brad Lancaster. And his book, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands, it's really, truly one of my favorite books. And the work they're doing in Tucson is incredibly inspiring. So if you're interested, check out the Watershed Management Group. But in his book, he's outlined 8 principles of water harvesting that are really helpful to consider when you're designing your property. And I can't really go into them because of time, all of them, but if you consider your property as its own watershed, and you use these 8 principles to start, you'll have a really good foundation to begin with. And I just want to highlight one of possibly the most impactful principles that people in this field repeatedly recite. And it's slow it, spread it, sink it. Or in other words, in the book, they say slow, spread, and infiltrate the flow of water. But you'll hear a lot of people saying slow it, spread it, sink it. And then we can go a little bit further into the other ones of the 8 principles here. And on these ones, let's see, there was, one of the most key ones here is the always plan an overflow route and manage that overflow as a resource. That I would say that that's super important because you could really end up doing a lot of damage to your property if you don't plan overflow routes and manage it in a way that even if you're harvesting, if it does soak up a lot of water, but then it gets too full, it can then flow back into like your foundation, or it can create like erosion or mudslides and things like that. So that's on these principles, that one is probably maybe the most important one in my eyes. And again, these can be found in Brad Lancaster's book, and I think that you guys can all probably get a copy of the presentation. All right, and we'll jump right into the 2 main water harvesting techniques. The first of them being rainwater harvesting. And by thinking about your property, like I said, as its own watershed, you can utilize these features on our properties, including our houses, to harvest rainwater. So rainwater harvesting can take multiple forms. My preferred method of rainwater harvesting is rain gardens. And then we'll also discuss the pros and cons of that shortly. But what I really love about rain gardens is that they are the least change for the greatest impact. By utilizing your current downspouts, then we can direct that water that hits your roof, and we can direct it passively into your garden, where we utilize possibly my favorite principle: slow it, spread it, sink it. And in these 2 gardens that we have here, you can actually see how water is passively directed from these downspouts, harvesting the water off of the rooftops and bringing it through different types of swales and basins in order to slow the water and sink it, spread it and sink it. And then another method of rainwater harvesting that's gaining a lot of popularity is rain barrels. And this is an installation that we actually did do in Tucson when I was out there. I think there's a lot of great applications for them in that climate, as they've got 2 rainy seasons. They have one in the middle of summer, and then they have one in the winter, which means that they're able to catch the water in summer, use the water when needed all the way up until winter, and then get more water. With us here in California, we have a very short period of rain. And when we have the rain, we don't even really need to use it. So you could end up storing your capacity in your rain barrels for 6 months, and you'd maybe have a 300-gallon tank, at most. The barrels that people use, those are like 50 gallons, but you can buy bigger gallons. But again, maybe you have a 300-gallon tank. And when you consider that a 2,000 square foot house can harvest 21,000 gallons in a year, and that a unit of water is 750 gallons and costs $6, is it worth it to buy a huge tank to basically harvest like $3 worth of water? So unless your concern was water security, or as maybe some sort of a fire buffer, then it's a really large investment with little payoff, in my opinion. And then lastly, also consider all the plastics, the aesthetics of a tank in your yard, and then also, again, the cost associated with it. It's not my preference, unless you have another reason. Cool. And then, so we have the rainwater harvesting techniques, the pros and cons of these techniques kind of listed here for you. So a rain garden, to me, the pros would be that they're low cost to create. It's passive hydration, works really well with natives, and it restores the water table because it's this massive amount of water that's slowed, spread, and then sinked deeply. The cons with the rain garden is that the water comes only when it rains. So, and then on the rain barrels, the pros are it's good to store water for household use. So if you're wanting to use it to wash hands, and you can't even use it to drink, and I don't really do a lot of work with that, so I can't consult too much on that, but I know that is a thing you can do, is drink the water. So if you're looking to store it for household use, then that's fine. If you've got a 500-gallon tank, the water then goes into the tank. Any extra water can then overflow out of the tank and into a rain garden. So you can kind of couple the two up if you're interested in using the water for household use. The cons of it are that barrels and installs can be pretty costly. Again, limited storage to the size of the tank, and that they are aesthetically unpleasing, at least in my opinion. Then another technique that I love is gray water harvesting. So gray water, just so everybody knows, is water that's used in your household gently. That's the best way I could put it. You can think of it as your bathroom sink that you use to wash your hands or brush your teeth. It's the shower water that you leave running to warm up, and then a little soap. And while a permit is actually needed to do showers and sinks, gray water from your laundry doesn't require any permit at all, and it's fairly easy to retrofit, given some stipulations. If it's in the middle of your house, that can be difficult, especially like if you're on like a slab or something like that. But if you have a crawl space or it's on a wall, it can be pretty easy to retrofit them. And the easiest way to get this water out to your landscape is demonstrated here in this picture. It's called a branch drain system, and it simply just uses your laundry machine's pump and then gravity to disperse the water out to your garden and the chosen plants in your garden. Cool. And then we have, let's see, the pros and cons on that. So on rainwater harvesting, a huge pro for me is that there's nutrients from the atmosphere that's in the water. And so water is considered like, rainwater is considered soft. And then there's no, I'm going to skip ahead for a second. Oh, it's not even on here. But in rainwater, there's no chlorine or chloramine. So that's such a huge benefit when you're coming from somebody like me who's doing a lot of soil microbiology. The chlorine and chloramine can destroy that biology. And so that's another pro to rainwater harvesting. There's abundant amounts available of it, given the right year or whatever. And like I said, it recharges the water table. The con is that you're only able to harvest that during the rainy season. When it comes to gray water harvesting, the pros are that you have consistent water over the year. I could also add, you're already using that water anyways, so it's just a second way to use the water. So that's really great. The cons are that you have to use limited types of soaps and detergents. When you aren't home, there isn't any irrigation going on. So if you go on a month-long vacation, then you end up potentially, especially if it's in August or something, you end up with a month where you're not irrigating. So if you should maybe have some form of supplemental irrigation available, so that way when you do go on vacation, you can set some sort of like automatic timer. And then also the limited amount of water, especially these days with high efficiency washing machines. So they're doing a lot less water than they used to. It can be really great though if you have maybe 4 or 5 kids or something, or I don't know, you own a gym and have to wash towels all the time. It'd be great in those situations. All right. Now, couple all that information with choosing the right plants for your system. is one of my favorite topics because I think that this is such an aha moment for so many people. If we try to understand the purpose of our garden and then the needs of our plants better, we can then either choose the right water harvesting method for our plants or the right plants for the water harvesting method that we choose. So on the right here, we're looking at a picture of a food forest that I actually installed in Martinez. And the purpose of this garden was to grow food. On the left, we're looking at a low water, oh, actually it's kind of backwards. On the left, we're looking at the food forest. On the right, we're looking at a low water rain garden. Though there are some non-natives in this that were already in the garden before it was installed. But consider the native habitats of many of our food producing plants. A lot of them are from places where there's consistent water over the year, or in other words, they're more moderate to high water need plants. In contrast, our native plants here in California, whoops, there we go, get control. There we go. Yeah, so our native plants, they're used to our seasonal cycle of rain in winter and spring, and then no rain for summer. So if we consider those two methods of water harvesting and their pros and cons, we can see that there's actually a natural fit of gray water, which is consistent watering throughout the year for food production, and then rainwater with natives. So you can actually combine also both of these though, as actually we did in this picture to the left. You can absolutely do that. And what's awesome about that is that you get the benefits of the gray water harvesting where it does get the frequent watering. But then you also get the benefits of the deep watering from the rain. You can't as much do that with the food, with the native, because natives don't really like to have moisture in summer. But the other cool thing about doing this, like rainwater harvesting, is the abundance of water will completely saturate all the soil that the roots are in. And as the water table lowers through the summer, the roots of like the natives will continue to kind of chase that water and grow deeper and deeper with that water table moving, which is ensuring that you have really well established plants with deeper roots rather than shallow, as you might get in your like overhead or drip irrigation. So it's, yeah, I can't say enough about rainwater catchment. And then Heath is going to talk a little bit about options on supplemental irrigation.
Yeah, so this presentation is focused on harvesting water, of course, but it's also important to just quickly note that there's often between 1 to 3 years for native plant gardens. Speaking of native plants coupling with rainwater harvesting, there's about 1 to 3 years often for native plant gardens to get established where you do need to provide supplemental irrigation. If you do it right, and depending on the precipitation that the following winter, it can take less time for native plants to establish themselves, but it's important to plan for that. With all of this in mind, we've got drip irrigation and smart controllers that can be great tools and systems in establishing a healthy and water conscious garden. So drip irrigation, sprinklers, for example, the overhead sprinklers, we all know them. They're actually only 65 to 75% efficient. And drip irrigation, those tubes that run along the ground, is 90% efficient. It reduces water runoff and water evaporation. And drip irrigation does that by applying the water at the root zone where it's needed the most. Using the right irrigation for the job makes a huge difference. Keeps your water use, it can keep your water use really low. You can even use controllers like smart controllers that connect to weather stations. And finally, when you're considering drip irrigation, whether or not you need to use it, it's important to look at what kind of soil you're working with. So smart controllers, they control basically when your water turns on and off in your irrigation system, and they can be programmed to ensure that you're getting the proper hydration, even in different parts. You can even establish different zones in your yard. So you can make sure that based on the smart controllers, your plants are getting what they need. And they are super smart because they can pair with local weather stations or use weather sensors and adjust how much they water in the program based on the weather. And finally, there's actually a 50% rebate offered from the Solano County Water Agency, up to $300 back on purchasing new controllers. So that can really help you set yourself up for success without hurting your bank account too much.
Yeah, and on the first off, the ETO rate, that's what we use to denote evapotranspiration. So you on the smart controllers, you can actually put in the evapotranspiration rate given which can be found on like a couple different websites, including it's called WUCOLS, WUCOLS, which we can provide as well. But it'll tell you the evapotranspiration rate for all across the year. And so like July is going to be your 100%, and January and December are actually 0, and then you have everything in between, and the watering will actually adjust in those months based on that. And then as Heath said, then you're also able to connect it to a weather sensor, which if there's rain, it won't irrigate. If it's hot, it can irrigate a little bit more. And then just to give everybody an idea on the controllers, the ones that I really like to use and highly recommend to our clients is it's a Hunter. I think it's called Hunter HP 300, something like that. Again, we can get that in the notes sent to you, but they're around $300 or $350. And so if the water agency rebates 50%, you can get it for $150. So
in addition to irrigation and catching and slowing and spreading the water, once the water is sunk into your soil, there are some things you can do to keep the water in the soil, and mulch is an incredible resource. Using some form of mulch is critical to actually keeping any measurable amount of water in your soil. If you don't have mulch, up to 80% of rainwater will evaporate out of your soil, and with mulch on top of the soil, only about 10% of the rainwater evaporates. It also, in addition to keeping water in your soil, it provides nutrients for beneficial microbes in the soil, and it acts as a sponge when you use it in swales and basins, which allows roots to access and get water for more often throughout the year, for a longer period throughout the year. And before we get into some sweet examples, I would just want to take a minute on talking about the importance of having sort of a design and a plan when you are going to take some steps to creating water harvesting on your property. You want to make sure you have a design for a few reasons. You don't want to cause any damage. You want to consider what your garden is doing, what's the purpose of it, which can get really philosophical if you're into that kind of thing. But consider why you have your garden and what the needs of the plants are there. Consider how much water is harvestable from your rooftop. It depends on every rooftop, using each downspout and how much water is coming out of it, and understanding how to take the water that's coming out of the downspouts and get it to where it needs to go. And then finally, you want to design to get a sense of what kind of water budget you have to work with in terms of rainwater, so that you can plant the right kind of quantity and type of plants that are going to be able to sustain themselves on that.
also important in gray water, having an idea of how much water your laundry machine uses and how much laundry you do. And then there's places that we can also put in the resources that we provide to get an idea of how much water it takes to like support like a lemon tree, for instance. And you can have a budget, so you know how much water you're putting out there and how much water you're going to need to support the number of trees and plants you want.
A couple other things real quick about the importance of design in terms of water catchment, which can with rain gardens, for example, can include a lot of basins and swales where you're digging out the ground and filling it with wood chips so it can catch soil or catch water and sink it. In those cases, there are design elements like overflows that Michael's mentioned, we'll go into with these examples, and the slope that exists on your property, and also how far away from your foundation your swales and basins are going. So there are these technical aspects to consider that that make a design really useful, rather than just starting to dig or starting to try and implement a system without necessarily knowing what's in place.
Mm-hmm. As well as potential missed opportunities too.
Right. It could be even better than you think it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. Yeah, this is pretty brief to talk about, but basically it's also important to get organic matter in your soil. Mulch does over time help do that, but for every 1% that you increase your organic matter, it'll result in as much as 25,000 gallons of available soil water per acre. And I know not all of us have an acre. I don't know if any of us have an acre, but maybe a half acre. If you increase your soil organic matter by 2%, then that's 25,000 gallons more of water that your soil can hold. So, and the ways to increase your soil organic matter would be composting. I'm a big proponent in certain situations, in designs I will do, instead of doing wood chip mulch, I'll do living mulch. So that way I've got a lot of roots that are in the ground, which are, then we're also capturing more energy from the sun, which is interacting with the biology in the ground. And so we're increasing organic matter through those roots. And also chop and drop. So I have, I think a number of you probably have actually been out to my property if you came to like our composting workshop, but I had a ton of clover that I seeded on purpose, really tall clover, so I could get a lot of biomass. And in chopping and dropping that and just letting it go onto the ground, then I'm also working to increase my organic matter. So that is a huge key if you're wanting to create abundant, drought resilient gardens. So I wanted to give an example of some of these techniques in action. So this is a property in Benicia. It's a HOA that Sustainable Solano actually hired me to do the design for, and then they had their own on-site gardener who did the actual work. But this is a drone shot so that you can see kind of the design imposed on the ground. And there's a house that's over here, and they took the water off of that. So we designed it so that the downspout here would go down and under this sidewalk. And the first place that the water would go to is here. So the plans are for these to be dug out. These are what we refer to as basins. And so these are dug out, and they dug these really deep. They didn't have to be that deep. They dug it like 4 feet deep. But then that's a place where that water is able to go into. It will get filled with wood chips, and that will soak up all the water, making water more accessible for longer to nearby plants that can drive their roots over into that mulch. But also having that water sit there, that much water, thousands of gallons sit there and sink into the soil is able to raise the water table. And then from this basin, we then have a like spillway or overflow when this one fills up that goes into this basin here. Once this one fills up, it then moves over into this basin over here. Once this one fills up, then this one moves again over into this one. And then once this one fills up and it's too much water, it actually then fully overflows off that direction off the driveway. And which I didn't think would ever happen with 4 feet deep, but we had some really intense rains this year. And just you can see here, I mean, they were really, really deep. But this was this year, and this is a native pollinator garden. The goal here was to not only, help save water from not irrigating, capture water, but also really wanted to bring the feel of nature into what would otherwise feel kind of like a sterile neighborhood with all the lawns one after another. So, no life coming in, but we planned it to have butterflies coming in and hummingbirds and all that. But you can see that these basins I forget which month it was, I want to say it was February, but when we had all of those rains, these actually completely filled up and even overflowed. So there's thousands of gallons of water that were captured and sunk into the water table, which is also going to make these trees far more healthier and happy too, because now their roots will also drive down deeper and they'll have an adequate amount of water without any supplemental irrigation. Let's see here. So now this was actually today. I went over there and took a picture, and you could see the difference. We're in only May, but they haven't irrigated this at all. I don't think they're going to have to irrigate it anymore, given the amount of water we captured. But these lupins that were, like 12 inches tall and seemed to grow really slow, are 4 inches tall. They had huge flowers. Everything in the garden is thriving. There's still obviously a lot of growth that this garden's going to be able to do. There's like a red bud here. There's elderberry. There's a lot of different varying like heights. You have trees and shrubs and herbaceous layers, but all these plants are thriving with the waters that we got and this type of rainwater harvesting. So just to also go over quickly some of the or recap some of those rebates that they have. The lawn conversion rebate is $1.50 per square foot up to $1,500. Gray water rebate. So they actually have a $50 rebate for some of the components. Maybe on there's a valve that you need to put in. Basically, the components are probably around $200, I'd say. And they'll rebate $50 on the components. And then they have the 50% up to $300 that they'll rebate you for smart controllers. And then also what we do for our clients is we actually will help start that application process. And that pretty much is going to cap off our presentation tonight. We did want to maybe just also put out there some future projects that we're interested in doing. If anybody knows any of these types of projects going on, we'd love to be involved. So it's creek and marsh restoration or watershed restoration. We're really excited about that type of stuff.
Thank you so much, Michael and Heath. And then let's go to Q&A, right? So if anybody has any questions, you could like raise your hand and I can have you unmute, or you could put it into the chat.
Yeah, and maybe real quick too, I'd just like to say that, we don't really have the opportunity to go really deeply into any exact how-to on every technique, but I do really like that book, the rainwater, water harvesting or rainwater harvesting for drylands and beyond. It's got a ton of really good information. So if it's something that you're interested in doing on your own, definitely check that book out because it has a lot of techniques. And if you're interested in gray water, there's a book called Creating a Gray Water Oasis, I believe is the name. And that's a really good resource for that. So.
Okay, we do have a question in here. Does chop and drop result in dried matter that is a fire threat?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I guess it could. I've not had that. It depends on, I guess, on how much organic matter you have. Hmm. There's a lot of situations I think in that like, determine that answer. If you've got overhead irrigation going or something, then no. But if you're doing that in a big, on a big property or something, and you're just chopping it down with maybe like a weed eater or something, then yeah, I could see that, but maybe no more than having the dried weeds. I'm sure the dried weeds are worse. So I don't know. I don't have the best answer for that. So I apologize.
Yeah, I
There's
mean,
also a question earlier about a worm tower. Someone was given a worm tower, but it does not have holes in the bottom of the bucket.
Hmm.
So the worms have started to drown, and they are
Oh.
asking, do ours have holes in the bottom?
Yes.
Well, they actually, or they don't have bottoms.
And it's not like a waste basket. It actually comes in 3 panels that you put together so that it's not watertight there too, but it does also have holes. Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like somebody just gave you a waste basket with a hole cut in the bottom.
and then we've got, are you emailing the hard copy of the presentation? Are you going to provide the PDF of the presentation, Michael?
Yeah.
Yep. So Sue, I converted my property last year with Solano County Water Agency and have wood chips, but I'm concerned again with it being a fire hazard. Any input regarding that?
Yeah, no, the wood chips, I wouldn't worry about that being a fire hazard at all. I don't think that there's enough oxygen, unless you already had a fire blazing through, like because you had weeds growing through it. No, I don't think that would be an issue.
Also, back to the chop and drop thought exercise. You usually chop and drop when the plants are green, so there's
Mhm.
moisture in them. The moisture in the plants will encourage them to decompose and become sort of a green mulch.
Mhm.
So, maybe consult an ecologist to know for sure. But my thought is with chopping and dropping, you usually want to do it when the plants are green, and so that will reduce the risk of any fire hazard coming from the chop and drop itself.
So the 2 fire ones were from the same person, right? Or yeah, or no?
No,
Sorry, I don't have the
I
comments
don't
up.
know. Yes, the Sue
So I'm
asked.
wondering if maybe Sue can turn, or we can unmute Sue and maybe she could tell us her situation more specifically.
Or I can see if
Yeah, because I mean, Heath is right in that, but also just like when when you dry herbs, you're cutting them green too, and they do dry. So I
Right.
don't, yeah, but they're so close to the ground, and like what I've seen is if you're doing a lot of it, it forms like a mat. And um, yeah, I just think that there's not enough oxygen to like start a fire. If fire's that close, I think you've got a bigger problem than your mulch.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, we
Yep.
can hear you, Sue.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, here I am trying to clear any weeds that aren't getting water, so I don't have an issue, because I want to do the weed abatement. And I want to have this defensible space around my home and the property, really.
Mhm.
But then, I was just envisioning, so you clear out, like you said, chop and drop. So you clear as much as you can, and then you just lay it down, say
Mhm.
over a drip system, because I have drip emitter or drip line,
Yep.
which provides some moisture, which, to your point, I think would hopefully promote the decomposition. But I
Mhm.
was just worried, with the heat, the evaporation, it dries out. If there is a wildfire or there's sparks,
Mhm.
I just worry about that being dry matter that could catch fire, not start a fire necessarily,
Mhm.
but catch fire. And kind of the same, and I've been worried about those wood chips, but yeah. And just because they're in the front of the property and they're southwest facing, and they're about 3 to 5 inches deep. And as we get into August, September, you know, the upper layers are pretty dry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just wondering. I haven't consulted, say, the fire department yet to get their input, but I wondered, you know, since this is what you
Okay.
guys do, maybe you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I've never got that question. I've never thought about it. But I'm thinking about like all the examples and you know that I've seen, and I just don't think that, because a lot of times you're chopping and dropping maybe in like a food forest situation where you've got
Yeah.
a lot of greens, or you know, like you're not really chopping and dropping in like a weedy field. So
Correct.
I can't picture any situations where that would be a concern. I'd be more concerned about an ember falling on my like roof or in my gutter in like summer than in my chop and drop.
Okay,
garden. Yeah,
that's good. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Stu, my thought about your southwest facing wood chip area. I don't, not seeing your property, I have no idea, but I feel like the principles of permaculture would encourage planting, like, can you put more plants there? That would be my question, because if you can establish more plants there, that's going to provide trees, increase, or sorry, provide some shade, increase moisture content in the soil.
Absolutely. When I participated in the program with Solano Water Agency, I calculated, you know, once the plants are mature, that, you know, most of it's going to be covered. It's just a matter of getting through that maturation process year to year. Plus, we've added trees, so we have shade. But it takes time.
It takes time. It does. Yeah. These are great questions. They're going to keep me thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. And then we had some questions that I've been we've been in the chat with people have been adding input on wood chips, where to source wood chips. And, you know, like we work with local arborists, any local arborists, you could contact them. A lot of times they just bring them to you for free, but the challenge is you get whatever their load is, which is usually, I don't know, 8 to 15 yards. So it's quite a bit of wood chips. Chipdrop.com is a website that works with multiple arborists. And so I've used that one personally successfully. And then I know, and then Mary Shaw, I don't know if you want to unmute and ask, because I think you're talking about oh yeah, Sue's Eco Mulch. So yeah, if you only want to get a few yards, you can definitely get it from Eco Mulch in Martinez. But I think they charge like 30 something per yard. But if that's maybe worthwhile, if you only need 1 or 2 yards, and then you're not having to worry about moving it.
Yeah, that's the least expensive option around. Like there's a lot of places that have mulch. And even eco mulch can range from like $38 a yard to like 60, depending on what you're getting. But yeah, I mean, with my clients, I do go over like the pros and cons of the free one, because Nicole raised a lot of like good things with, yeah, you could end up with 15 yards. And we had a situation where they also must have cut down like a yucca tree. And so there was all of that like fibrous stuff, which made it so difficult to move, and it wasn't very attractive in the yard. And yeah, so it can be really difficult. So there's pros and cons. I like reusing renewable resources. So yeah, it depends. There's a lot of pros and cons to that.
And then there was another question about preferred type of wood chips. Is there any wood chips that you stay away from? What's your thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah, so I'm clear to ask what wood chips that they have in stock that are not, like if I'm buying from somewhere, what they have in stock that's not treated. Eco Mulch, I know that they do have some dyed options, but they're using food grade dyes, and so I feel pretty good about that. So if you're wanting like a colored one, but I don't know that I would recommend like the really dark colors, because that's going to absorb the heat from the sun, and then that's going to affect like your microbiology. So yeah, other than that, redwood, I've read different things where redwood perhaps maybe imitates a forest floor the best, so it might facilitate mycorrhizal, man, that's getting kind of deep, certain types of fungi might like help facilitate that growth, which is really beneficial to plants. So potentially like that shredded redwood is really nice aesthetically too. But it might be a little bit more pricey. Other than that, like I've heard a lot of people have concerns about pines or like oaks, and I think that it's most of it I'm like fine with it. Is maybe as long as it doesn't have some kind of diseases that can infect your other plants, your other trees.
And I think the arborists know not to give you diseased trees, but
Yeah.
if you are concerned, maybe just saying that,
Yeah.
Mary, do you have any other questions? Do you want to unmute to have any follow-up questions?
I am unmuted, but I asked my follow-up question there in text. So just wondering, it seemed like we were talking about mulch mostly, and is it different than any wood chips that you would put in a basin that you're digging out? Is that
Yeah,
a
that's a
different
good
type of wood
question.
chip?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you have the ability to source chunkier wood chips to fill your basins, that's better because it will break down slower. So like that, and it will absorb more water and like a sponge, whereas that shredded redwood, is just going to mat and maybe even cause some anaerobic activity if you're going at that depth. And yeah, and just not absorb moisture in the same way. So I like for covering maybe that 3 inches. I do like the 3 inches. So that's typically what you want to mulch it on your whole garden is 3 inches. So for the general garden area, I like that that shredded redwood. But then like in your basin, if you want to bring the level up to be the same level as the rest of the garden, then it'd be best to potentially do the chunkier wood stuff. The other thing too is that in a lot of like designs I do, sometimes I like to even keep some of the different varying like topographical stuff from the basins. I like the different shapes and stuff. So I maybe won't mulch it completely full, so I have different like natural feels going on for aesthetics as well. So
We got another question here from Sandra. What plants do you use and recommend for living mulch in hot areas with clay soil?
yeah, it's hard to establish living mulch in summer or like spring. So a lot of that I like try to recommend to do in fall, winter, early spring. And it really depends again on your purpose. That's kind of important. So if you're doing like a food forest, I maybe like certain clovers that can fix nitrogen, and when there's like micro clover. But then again, going back to purpose, if for me at my garden, I did red clover because it gets like 2 feet tall, and I'm able to. So I got a lot of biomass because I was really trying to drive my organic matter in my soil up. There's also dichondra, which is really low growing, and I've had success with growing that in clay soil too, but it's really low growing. So I like to use that maybe in like my raised beds. You can also, comfrey is great. It's not going to be like a ground cover, but it is a living mulch. Basically anything is a living mulch. If it's going to grow and, and create like protection from the sun. So yarrow is a really great one as well. It spreads out. And yeah, I wish I had a picture of my garden because it's definitely protected from the sun, and I don't have mulch in it because the purpose of that one was to be a food forest and not a low water garden. Hopefully that answered the question. I think I gave a few examples.
Yeah, I think it did. Yep. She said, thank you for the responses. So I think that answered it. Was there any other questions? Anybody?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, Lacey, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Garden teacher
Uh-oh, is that my internet?
And something I
Lacey, you're breaking up. I think you're gonna have to put it in the chat.
Oh,
I'm hoping, I don't know if it's my internet either, no, okay.
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, we heard you say that.
Actually, if my camera is off, not so much. Okay, good. Yeah, because I think too, what just was while we're waiting for her question, I think the living mulch thing, because it's also, you don't want like plants that are going to compete for nutrients, right? Isn't that right, Michael? So like, that's why you use a micro clover for.
I don't worry too much about plants competing for nutrients,
Okay.
or water or any of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, but that clover can be pretty aggressive, but it depends again on the purpose. If you want like low maintenance, I wouldn't go with a full like living mulch, because you will need to like kind of pick your friends and like protect them, and from like the stuff that's meant to like serve the purpose of maybe creating organic matter or whatever. So like I manage the relationships going on, which I really also enjoy, because I get to connect more with my garden and like the natural process, and there's like so much to learn from it. But for the most part, I'm not like of the thought that they're competing for nutrients. I think that I'm creating abundance with all the different roots and all the microbes. There's so much nutrients being created that they support each other. Plants are much happier next to other plants than like by themselves.
So then just a few follow up on those questions, and then we'll get to Lacey's question. It says, do you plant clover and dichondra from seed?
Yes, definitely. And I've experimented with one way that I think I really like too. There's a couple of things that I could recommend, because it can be difficult to establish some of these ground covers because they can dry up. So the seed can dry up so quick after it's like been soaked and like hydrated to where it wants to sprout. One of them that seems to be working pretty decently, but still having some difficulty, have to keep up on the watering sometimes. But it's coffee chaff. So I'll like sprinkle the seed on the soil and then cover it with the coffee chaff, which is a free resource from Bay Area Coffee, I believe is the name of it, on Industrial Parkway in Benicia. You can get big bags of it for free. And so I'll sprinkle that on top, and then I'll soak that, and that kind of creates a protective barrier, but it's like light enough that the sprout can still pop through. Another possibility would be to like cover it with shade cloth, or cover with some kind of cloth for maybe like a week, to not let it dry out, and then uncover it so that way it can then grow. So those are a couple ways that can help to establish it. And then also when you have some starting to establish, coming through and reseeding, then like they're protecting the soil, and that just, you really see from just like having maybe a 50% coverage how much protection it's getting, because it gets so much easier then to establish the next round of seed.
And there was a question about the coffee.
Mhm.
That what did you call it?
Coffee chaff.
Shaft?
Chaff.
Or chaff.
Chaff,
I think it
chafe.
might be
Chafe.
chaff. It's spelled like, I'll put it how it's spelled.
CHAFF, I believe, but yeah.
I think it's it's like the skin that when they roast it, it's the unusable part that they roast. So probably any of the roasting companies probably have that.
Yep. I think about it like the skins on peanuts. People probably are pretty familiar with the skin on peanuts,
Yeah.
and when they roasted that skin pops off, and so they just collect it all and throw it in a bag. They've got an abundance of it.
Here's the link to Bay Area Coffee Inc. They're in Benicia in the industrial park.
And then wanted to get to Lacey's question, that she's doing lasagna layering in raised beds and wondering what organic matter you recommend I use. And then something about hugelkultur style, I think, still have much to learn about it.
Yeah. So it depends on the depth of the beds. Like if you have really deep beds, I understand what you're doing with the hugelkultur, you know, putting a bunch of rotted dead wood in the bottom layer and then putting some dirt. I like just put fill dirt. And then compost. Like that's how you get the organic matter up is compost. And I did do a workshop. Well, I did we do a Zoom on that? Nicole, on compost? We did on at least on biology. But we did an in-person presentation on compost. But yeah, because I'm like definitely have a preference on compost. Anybody that knows me is I've got a very big preference on compost. It has to be thermophilic. It has to be kept the right moisture content through the whole process. I assess it under a microscope to ensure it has all of the right microbes that I want, fungi, bacteria, nematodes, because that's what's important for nutrient cycling. You will get organic matter pretty much regardless, but there is a such thing as great compost and not so great compost. Some compost can even be hydrophobic, meaning that it doesn't really absorb water that well and actually can even like kind of shed it away. So yeah, there's a source. I've given the source before in other presentations. It's Catalyst Bioamendments. They're out of Nevada City. I know that they do it right. They actually, when they send you the compost, they'll actually send you also the numbers. They've done the counts on all of the biology, and they'll send you the numbers of how many nematodes, how much fungi, how much protozoa, and then also we do also produce some compost here that we are starting to sell as well. But it's also almost unfair to call it compost because it's more of a microbial inoculant. It is composted material, but again, it's done in such a way that it has all those microbes.
Lacey, did that answer your question? She has a follow-up something too for lasagna layering. In the past, I used sticks, straw, food scraps, sort of. She says food scraps, leaves, coffee grounds, soil, biochar, soaked cardboard, and more soil on top to bury it all. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Did you have success?
Yeah, right. Did you have success with lasagna layering in the past? Because sometimes the wood chips if you put wood in there, it can kind of extract the nitrogen. Success with certain plants and not others.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if your lack of success was with the like cole crops, brassicas, like broccoli, cabbages, those types of things, because now we're getting into soil microbiology, but like that lasagna layering that you did created like a lot of fungal dominance, likely. And it has a form of nitrogen and also forms mycorrhizal relationships, and which brassicas don't really like. And so, yeah, was that the case? Was it the like kind of brassica type plants that struggled?
There's nothing in the chat yet.
Okay.
Corn struggled.
It could be like you said, Nicole, maybe some of the nitrogen tie up. Yeah. The thing when I create like garden beds and I do raised beds and things like that, the first year I'm not expecting it to be great because I'm doing biology. I'm like kind of working differently than a lot of other like conventional ways of growing. Mine don't start off amazing right off the bat because I'm trying to get the biology introduced. I'm trying to get the organic matter up, and every year it gets better, and it goes beyond what it could be conventional. But conventional kind of works the opposite direction where it like starts off decent and then gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So like in the type of gardening that we do, there you don't have to rotate tomatoes and all that kind of stuff because you should have enough biodiversity in your soils that it defends against like none of these pest like fungal spores or molds or any of that stuff, they shouldn't be able to take root because there's so much diversity. So I would say that, I don't know if you still have access to that bed, but just keep working with it, do the cover crop, and it will improve for sure.
Yeah, and she's actually in Hawaii. So
Not
yeah.
getting my compost.
Yeah, taro. Yeah. I know. I just assume everybody's in California. Yeah.
Yeah, you could look up like the Soil Food Web School. That's where I did my certifications through. It's really, really involved. It's like a multi-year process, but they do have their professionals listed on there. And so they may have some people producing compost in a biocomplete way in Hawaii.
Lacey, I was gonna say too that, one of the first main permaculture principles is called protracted and thoughtful observation. And so to Michael's point, like, you're right on track by just watching and seeing how things go, noticing what happens, noticing what plants are happy and what plants aren't. So just by paying attention, you're already on the right path, and there's nothing wrong with just continuing to see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. It's going to get better and better as long as you don't put any type of fertilizer or fungicides or pesticides, and ideally also going back to soil microbiology, trying to get use filters to get the chlorine and the chloramine out of your water source if you're using municipal water.
And so there's we'll take this last question, and then I want to be it's time to close out. So Linda did some similar layering, fruit tree cutting, food scraps, coffee grounds, horse manure. I have horses. How long should I be dry composting the horse manure? I'm sure there's resources.
Yeah, I don't really do dry composting manure. I do it in thermophilic. I use it as a nitrogen source to heat up my piles. So yeah, I mean, there's some things that make me a little bit nervous about composting it without like getting it to temperature, including like pathogens. If it goes anaerobic, also, then you're creating a lot of anaerobic microbes, which can inhibit mycorrhizal like growth, and well, not necessarily growth, but the relationship, the symbiotic relationship like that they create with the plants. It can actually inhibit that growth. So so I don't know, I would prefer to definitely compost it, hot compost manure, unless you're using like rabbit manure or like goats or something.
Yeah, but that's using what you have on hand, right? And then just figuring. I'm sure there's a ton of YouTube resources for the to learn about what to do with the horse manure. But yeah, using what you got on hand. I've got rabbit, so I have rabbit.
And yeah, and again, feel free to email any questions that you have. Like, we're happy to answer them since we are wrapping up.